Mesdames, Messieurs, bon.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this last afternoon session of the Casablanca Insurance meeting. Before going into the topic, I'd like to thank the Moroccan Federation of Insurance and Reinsurance for holding this meeting and for its resilience as this meeting is unfolding in the context that you all know. I'd like to pay tribute to the creativity of the technical team as we are in hybrid, distance and remote and in presence and attendance. And I'd like to also recall that this meeting, Casablanca meeting, is taking place by a turmoil challenged by the pandemic that really compelled the insurance world and sector to adapt through new channels and sales channels like the digital that has been imposed with strength in 2020. It has almost invaded us, readapt and readjust through the coverage of new risks like a world disease that we haven't experienced for several decades, and readapt through a new customer base to be broadened and expanded. And we have discovered in this pandemic world that a lot of people were not covered by negligence, by lack of knowledge of insurance products. So we're talking here about inclusion. And this is precisely the theme of our meeting this year as we're all talking about insurance inclusion and resilience to the pandemic. And this is a question that we as insurance companies, enterprise world are posing ourselves. So some questions are naive and some are really technical. So let me share some one of them. So to what extent the insurance can actually cover us in case of pandemic, and what are the guarantees when I buy insurance on internet? Is the cost of my insurance going to be rising? I'm talking about fund of natural disasters insurance and coverage. So therefore, the cost of insurance has increased for companies and enterprises. Another question: to what extent goes the insurance from the insurance to the reinsured, etc.? And when the risk arises, who pays what and who pays for who? And all these topics have been addressed during yesterday's session from different angles and perspectives, and they will be also addressed this afternoon from different angles with a prestigious panelists and keynote speakers. Before giving the floor, I'd like to call to my side Mr. Bashir Badou, the Managing Director of the Federation of Insurance and Reinsurance. He is the organizer of this major events. So how was your day, Mr. Badou? Very good day. Beautiful opening ceremony. We had the pleasure to have the Minister of Finance, the Governor of the Central Bank, and of course the President of the governance, the minister, the governor of the central bank, and so a panel that was very rich and prestigious as the guests. This is at the high level of expectancy of the Casablanca insurance meeting. So you are also an insurance company and a leader of insurance companies way before being the president. So if you were to resume the future. So what future for the insurance world in a world in motion? And Mr. Attali is going to talk about it, and I would like to warmly thank Mr. Attali on behalf of the Moroccan Federation of Insurance and Reinsurance. He's been so kind and doing us a friendship to honor us with his presence. And I know that a lot of insurance companies that I have been exchanging with are looking forward to hear him and listen to him. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go.
Quel avenir pour l'assurance dans un monde en profonde mutation?
Alors, bienvenue à cette session qui
So welcome to this keynote speakers session with the theme, What Future for the Insurance in a World of Major Changes and Motion. Good morning. I'm so sorry for not being in attendance with you. I have such a nostalgia for Morocco, and I'm so homesick for Morocco, and I have such a great friendship for Morocco. I would have loved to be with you to feel and smell the flavors of Morocco that I cherish so much. Mr. Attali, you spoke about the mutations and changes in the insurance world. I'd like to introduce Mr. Attali, but he's not to be introduced. He's a thinker, philosopher, writer, novelist, and economist. Mr. Attali is very well known and globally known, and we'd like to thank him for taking some time and his time for being with us. I'd like to reiterate to Mr. Attali our greatest thanks and heartfelt thanks for being with us, for honoring us with his presence. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, and as I told him, we will be pleasured and pleased to welcome him in Casablanca physically anytime soon. So I will leave you in the hands of Mr. Fadel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The insurance sector is very close to my heart, but because for years I always believed it is a central element and sector, not only for the finance and economy, but for human history. So going back to the insurance history is passionating. Insurance goes back to the ages and going back to long-standing societies that have been in common with risk management. If we were to give a definition of a society, each society is legitimized by an insurance process, insurance giving to its vassals that in exchange will give him the power and giving back to him a certain form of protection. So insurance will come up with the best means to protect against potential risks. And if I may, I'd like to go out of the insurance world to talk about the current situation and come back later on to what it is that the insurance can bring and how it can be impacted by the current changes. The current crisis will tell us so much about insurance. It will relate the insurance to its first rank and also show us some of its limitations. And earlier on, by the way, you spoke about the fact that many people found out during this crisis that the insurance cannot be everything, but insurance is actually pooling risks. And when everyone is covered and challenged by the same risk, the insurance cannot cover it all. You can be actually asking the big question, coming back to the fundamental question that is posed, should be posed in the future debates between the insurance world. So the crisis that we are in is not coming to the end and is far from being finished and will bring about a lot of implications and changes. It is still here and it is not finished yet, despite the fact that vaccines are available. And even if they were, and when they will be in a couple of months and even beyond, it will still be a challenge. And I would like to say that even if all vaccines were available for everyone in Morocco, in India, in Europe, and all over the globe, it would not be enough because, and you are better suited to know that me than me, there are a lot of collateral and material damage and sustainable damage, non-cure diseases, breakdowns, and companies that have closed down. A lot of collateral damage to manage stemming from the pandemic. And secondly, because vaccines might, and we don't know yet, would not maybe be able to protect against all variants. So we should get prepared that other variants will prepare for which will come up for which we're not prepared. And because this crisis will remind us that it was predictable. And I am one of those who are saying pandemic are possible. And we have been voicing out that pandemics are there and we should get ready and prepared to it. And Actually, the Asians actually 54 million of inhabitants. They had 7,800 dead, but this country actually was very prepared. But with or without vaccine, we need a much better management of the pandemic, and we could have done it before or better if we were prepared. So for future pandemic, we should be aware that this poses a question of future damages that could occur and future threats that are as foreseeable and predictable as the current pandemic, on which that we're not acting enough. Of course, we all keep in mind the question of global warming and climate warming, and we have evidence of it every day. We have data saying that the cherries of Japan and blooming of the cherries of Japan has never been as early for the last 800 years than it has been this year. And still, and yet, we're not doing enough to prevent, but not only on nature, but on water scarcity, the challenge on biodiversity or end of biodiversity, invasions of mosquitoes and other kinds of birds. And you know that Morocco has been challenged by that. So all this is predictable, is known, and we know what to do to stop it, but we haven't done it, like for the pandemic. And if pandemics are reversible, or relatively reversible, so they can be stopped. And I spoke about some pandemic that are reversible, but unfortunately we had a lot of deaths. But there is still a form of reversibility, but it's not the case. So for other threats that I spoke about, they are not threats that are at the scope with the level of a vaccine. There will not be a vaccine against global warming or climate change, against water scarcity, or vaccines against other type of birds invasions or such as invasions. In order to prevent this, we need to come up with a totally radical attitude, and you will see that the insurance world has to play a role. We need to realize that this model has to be changed radically. We have to go to a live economy and a positive society that is working in the best interest of future generations. So all what we do doesn't make sense if we do not protect future generations. And this is a way to go forward, and this is only the thing that positive societies should do. A society that has understood that the present is impacted by the future and not only by the past. Of course, I said that it was impacted by the past because of past challenges, but the present is impacted by the future. If you do not work to preserve current life from the future will be impacted. So we have to work in the best interests of future generations. So we want the future generations to be able to work, to fund our pension funds, to have doctors that will replace those who will retire, so we'd better work in the best interests of future generations. And for that, this concept of positive societies is displayed and implemented in a series of economic sectors. So it goes without saying that fossil energies is contrary to the best interests of future generations from the climate standpoint, but also from all other standpoints. So for fossil energies, plastics, or to produce other products should be very quickly and largely replaced by renewables. And other sectors, what we call live economy sectors that only account for half of the world population, and that should become at the very core of the economic and social and political concern. Health, education, agriculture, insurance, finance, inclusive finance, long-term and sustainable housing, clean energies and sustainable energy, security, democracy, peace, and stability. So there are about 12 arguments and principles that's the long-standing and positive society is based on. Insurance is part and parcel of the scheme. It is at the very heart of this whole reflection and the protection of societies, because it is vital for the most vulnerable groups and poorest groups. As you know, in Morocco, the poorest groups are the most threatened by collateral damage. The poorest is a person, the more vulnerable he will become. If you work in the microfinance, you would know it. If someone is not covered by a micro insurance, a small business that will he will create will vanish, and the large companies also. So insurance is absolutely vital to fight extreme poverty and keep people from extreme vulnerability. And then insurance will fall or will be enshrined in a change and mutation process. It is much more important and necessary and rational now more than ever to go towards prevention than reparation or repair of the damage. It will cost much less to prevent or to predict a pandemic like the South Koreans did than really repair the damage. It will be more affordable to protect ourselves and to predict a climate change than adapting to this climate change. So I think we are moving towards a society where the prevention will be the key word. Even in medicine, we move towards a preventive medicine that will be or will become a predictive type, a preventive type of medicine that will take over the repair or curing medicine. Of course, we will have to compensate the damages, but it will become at the very heart of future medicine, the preventive medicine. So all topics are around and circumvent on prevention. Vaccine is one of them, even if it's coming and stepping in emergency situations. But in general, prevention and will be actually the future. And the insurance companies can play a key role in the future to determine the prevention and forecasting role. So they will play a role with the public powers or side by side or in place of the public powers. You do it every day. In terms of life insurance, you can request your insured to prepare the conditions to have the best conditions possible. You do car insurance and you urge people with the premiums to create the conditions not to have damages. So prevention is absolutely critical, and it is one of the major skill and businesses, and forecasting is the best skill of the insurance companies. And the digital world and digitalization, for the best or the worst, will create the risks to figure out what are the risks. And thanks to artificial intelligence, we will be soon having all individual data to be able to know whether someone is maybe have predisposition to such diseases, dependencies, or risks, and we could predict or assess a more or less confidential profile of those who might have or be able to be covered by insurance schemes or have potential diseases. But the question is whether the premiums will go up to the customizations or individualizations. This is an evolution that is happening, or will it be covering with a more costly manner those who maybe not covered, those who are maybe under drug addiction, alcohol addiction, etc., by insurance schemes. This is a natural trend. It is something resistible. if a person freely can create the conditions of its non-dependence, or maybe someone for genetic reasons is not responsible for his addiction. So you have seen it. We have been seeing new problems where the digitalization will scale up those questions, because not only we will be having these answers on these problems on life insurance, but also on other problems, natural disasters, where we'll be increasingly aware of the data on behavioral knowledge, which leads us to a different topic. So the first theme that I address is from the philosophical standpoint, and the other is in terms of relationship between cause and relationship. Science is seeking a causality. What causes what? The digital world only is limited to correlation. So we have massive data and volume of data, and data is telling us that these events are not correlated with others. So we draw consequences, but the events are so many. So the causes and consequences are so many that there's a very high risk to see science just vanish and disappear behind the mere search for correlations and causes. Therefore, we're not seeking anymore to know that such or such a disease is caused by such a behavior, but we will be limiting ourselves to have an analysis that will link the correlation between such or such diseases. And we consider that this is a causal correlation that leads us to much deeper causes that we need to really study to come up with a deep prevention or forecasting, rather. So I am afraid, and we're seeing this appearing in many medical forecasts in the insurance world, and I fear that we are heading towards a society of correlation in which forecasting is limited to seek for statistic relations and data relations without studying the deep causes and deep economic sciences, which leads to a growing interdependence with fields that have no relations or no connections. I've been saying this. I don't know who will be the next organizing between insurance companies, data management, pharmaceutical companies, and political powers. But those who are managing the data, the GAFAs or artificial intelligence companies and the insurance companies, as well as pharmaceutical companies, are doing pretty much the same business in a way, and all of them do those businesses that are norm producers and standard producers. These are norms that are imposed to the public powers and guide them, because the public powers do not have the means to be as informed, competent, and powerful than the other sectors, insurance, pharmaceutical companies, and companies that three together represent leading powers and of calculations, competences, and knowledge. It is therefore paramount that public powers bring together a lot of knowledge in this field, and therefore insurance companies should work hand in hand and intensely with the public powers, for them not to limit democracy. We might fear one day an alliance between insurance companies, data managers, and pharmaceutical companies that will determine some behaviors that will allow to get some social protection, like a black hole of knowledge. It is therefore critical to avoid this, and for that we need to come up with the enabling conditions for insurance companies to work with the public powers in order to define democratic standards of forecasting and prevention that will not be only imposed from the outside, but also from the inside. But even if the contribution of the algorithms and GAFAs and medical companies will be, of course, still important, on a very important instrument. Therefore, I believe that insurance companies and reinsurance companies that have a vital role to play will be increasingly important. And in the longer run, if there was something like a global regulation in terms of prevention, it will come through the insurance companies. We have seen it in other fields. The market economy, considered by the market economies as fundamental, the field of finance, and we've seen the mechanisms of risk protection within the central banks or market regulation organizations are reinsurance mechanisms that are set for and fixed by international organizations. And I think that all these concepts that we have seen appearing on the market, financial markets, will be generalized, and we will see with time new international standards. I'm not talking about a world or global government, but here insurance companies have played a very important role, by the way, on social protection, labor accidents, and they will be playing an increasing role in prevention and to counteract digital technologies. And we have to really look carefully at what's unfolding in the Scandinavian countries. They have a very clear vision of all these questions, and they are looking at this in compliance with deep democratic values and respect. And what's unfolding in China, where the eagerness to know the behaviors in a correlated manner and not by causality or mass analysis, to create the conditions of total social discipline. I'm not talking about total and not totalitarian. So if we look at the two models, we know perfectly well that this is all guided by a fundamental idea. At the end of the road, at the end of this journey, we always have to split between security and liberty. And liberty has to be put forward. We need to create the conditions for security, not just destroy liberty and freedom. We have to come up with the right sound conditions to prepare this enabling environment. Thank you very much.
Alors, dans vos propos, il y a quelque chose.
So, in what you said, there was something that was quite interesting. So you were talking about turning to a more preventive rather than curative approaches, but we as individuals, when we want to take out an insurance, we're trying to take out insurance to cover something that happens at a given moment. This is why we take out that insurance. So can we imagine that individuals in the future will maybe pay for a preventive solidarity tax to pay less once the event occurs? So how will this be translated into actual insurance products? So let me ask you the second question. So a question from the audience. So what do you think could be how the insurance landscape could look like in Africa in the next 15 to 20 years? So the first question would probably take hours and hours to answer, because indeed there are new insurance products that could be introduced that could shift the coverage of insurance to prevention. But this assumes that insurance need to be logical and tailored to meet this demand. Obviously, we can charge more if the enabling conditions are in place for a higher service and for prevention. I mean, this service will be provided by someone, whether it's going to be by the states, by GAFAs, or by specific organizations, or will it be the insurance companies? So I believe that insurance companies are in the best position to provide this service and to obviously get paid to do so, provided that they do so properly. So the second question, I'm extremely optimistic regarding Africa. I believe that Africa has great growth potential. Obviously, we can draw a long list of problems in Africa. I'm not in as good of a position as you to do so, but I think that Africa has a very bright future. And I think that the first half of the 21st century is Asian, but the second half of the 21st century is African. And I truly believe that both demographic powers in 2050 will be India and Nigeria. And I think that there is a great potential for Moroccan and Moroccan insurance companies, or even Moroccan industries or banks, that understood much more than others that it was interesting to go seek this potential in the African middle class, not only the French-speaking African middle class, which is an interesting market. But the rule of thumb is that to be able to progress, it's important to start out with the closer countries. But when the DRC will have an effective rule of law, it will be a great market for Africa, but everything will be based on Nigeria's stability. If Nigeria successfully remains stable and becomes increasingly stable, and in fact you have an extremely important role to play in that, well, the development of insurance in Nigeria, I believe, is absolutely incredible and gigantic. So thank you, Mr. Attali. I would also like to mention Ethiopia too, which has a great potential, where French-speaking companies, Moroccan and French, are not sufficiently present. So thank you very much, Mr. Attali. On behalf of the Federation and all of the participants, would like to thank you, and also already look forward to meeting you for the next edition next year. If you have any comments or additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me.